It is May 13. This is the CEO Barbecue. My name is Antonio, and today I'm going to be looking for copper, gold, and maybe a little bit of silver again in the Vicuña district on the border between Chile and Argentina. And I'm going to be joined by Stephen Nano, who is the technical advisor to Mogotes Metals. And as always, this is going to be a long one, so feel free to use the timestamps provided in the description and on the time bar to better navigate this video. Before we get into the actual interview, though, I'd like to warn you that we have received monetary compensation for the production of this video from the company that's being interviewed. Please understand that this channel is a business that sells content producing services to companies, which means you cannot rely on this video for research, and you should treat this as an advertisement instead. Research is conducted by reading the company's official filings, which you can find on setterplus.ca. Please only watch this if you know what you're doing. This interview is intended only for experienced junior mining speculators because mineral exploration, development, and mining is a very tough business where failure is the norm. This is going to be a conversation that is general and impersonal in nature, containing forward-looking statements. I am not a licensed financial advisor, so before continuing on, please talk to an investment advisor with a good long-term track record because your capital is at risk, and I am neither a licensed financial advisor nor do I have a good long-term track record. If you're not 100% sure you understand 100% of the disclaimers I just showed you and told you about, please go to the last section of this video and do not consume this content unless you fully understand and agree with everything said therein. That all said, Mogotes is listed as MOG, so that would be MOG on the TSXV in Canada, where over the last 3 months, an average of, and this has increased recently, but an average of 330,000 shares have traded daily. The stock's 52-week high is 21 cents, and its 52-week low is 10 cents, with a market cap of $49.5 million and 247.5 million shares outstanding. Today, this is a 20-cent stock with a 50 and a 200-day moving averages at respectively 14.7 and 14.6 cents. No in-depth company overview here is needed, as Mogotes has been grilled on the barbecue multiple times in the past, and there will be a Mogotes specific playlist linked in the description and the pinned comment of this video, where you can find all the previous conversations that I've had with the guys over at Mogotes. Today, though, Stephen and I are talking about two news releases where essentially the takeaway for me was that, Stephen, you've now got new and refined drill targets, and I actually want to kick off the conversation with the last part of your previous news release. So not the one from yesterday, but the one from before that, in which you at the end of that news release, you talk about kind of the next steps for the company, some of which have already happened with that news release from yesterday. But you say on here that you're expecting, the preliminary results for the geophysics that you did on Los Mogotes. We'll talk about that. You said that you're expecting the 3D geophysical model for the MT and the DDIP surveys. We'll talk about that as well. But you're also waiting for assay results from the infill sampling program at Los Mogotes. You're waiting for assay results from the soil grid sampling program at Meseta, and you're also waiting for results from the trenching and rock chip sampling program on the Argentine sampling program.
A lot of waiting there, Antonio. But yes, there's a real flow of information that'll be coming in over the next weeks and months. That hopefully will make interesting reading for our investors.
Well, that actually is what I wanted to ask here, which is, I mean, it sounds like a lot more data still has to come in. So why announce targets now? Why not wait for all that data to come in and then compile it and then go to the market with that news?
Yeah, I think what's sort of, I guess, a little bit interesting is it doesn't feel that long ago that we were first talking to you about putting the deal in place for the option on the ground in Chile, and we've moved it forward really, really rapidly here and really put intense effort into it. Being driven because we're seeing very interesting geology and now geophysics. Why announce it? There is just so much information here. So, we can put out very large, very complex, multi-layered news releases, or we can bring the information forward as we see important stuff coming to hand. And I think that's a sensible way. It allows the story to be delivered in bite-sized pieces that people can follow. The thing with what we're doing is we're using a very geoscience-driven approach here, where it's not necessarily simple things to explain. There's a lot of complex geoscience, new exploration techniques and technologies that if we put it into large news releases, we've tried it and people just get overwhelmed. So sensible pieces, important steps, as you've seen with the 2 news releases that we put out. There's still waiting for the preliminary lines for a number of the big survey lines that we finished surveying. So there'll be more bite-sized pieces here before we have a full 3D model. And the geochemistry is going to fill that story out. We're fully anticipating to see more encouraging information here in the coming days.
Well, I guess why I'm raising that question here, Stephen, is because I'm wondering how confident are you in these targets? Also, because a lot of the language in the news releases is I guess uncertain, such as you talk about could, maybe, potentially, probably, and of course this is exploration, so nothing's ever certain. It's quite the contrary most of the times. But what's the level of confidence that you now have in these targets, and is that going to change over time?
I think I've said this a few times on your show already, that exploration is a very humbling business. So there are no guarantees of discovery, but what we're doing here is looking for targets that aren't necessarily outcropping. So we're dealing with pieces of information. So we obviously have to premise these things. A geophysical anomaly is not a mineral deposit. Some rock chip samples are not a mineral deposit. They're just pieces of a story that give you confidence to move forward. So that's why we qualify what we're saying. It's the right and sensible, balanced thing to do for investors. How confident are we? Look, all I can tell you is that we're very excited by what we're seeing. The location of where these targets are directly on strike, and in the case of, say, something like Meseta, literally only a kilometre south of the most southerly drill hole in that spectacular resource that was announced by Lundin Mining, for Filo del Sol. So that gives us some confidence. But the magnitude of the geophysical anomalies are the strongest that we've seen. And, again, they're interim results and things will move around a bit and change once we get the 3D model, but they're the strongest responses that we've seen so far within the property. And, we've reviewed some of the other targets we have, which are very attractive targets, but these are very, very strong geophysical responses. The surface results that we've got, the magnitude of the copper anomalies, they're not economic grades, but if they're taken in context of the geophysics and the alteration patterns that we're seeing, they're very encouraging. So we've got a lot of pieces of the picture here that say, look, we think we know where we are in the depth of the system from the information that we've gathered at surface, and that includes some fairly careful work with the mineral chemistry, the alteration that gives you direct vectors towards where the hotter parts of the system are. But when you see those surface patterns with a nice big geophysical anomaly of that strength sitting straight underneath it, you're going to be drilling it, right? And that's just a clear, objective here is this is a brand new drill target, and it's come together in a couple of months from some, great work from our field teams that, they've shown real dedication and courage to get out there and cover that terrain in that time and deliver the geology and the geophysics in such short order. So
We'll talk about
very excited by the targets. Yeah.
We'll talk about the geochem and the geophysics and how they coincide as well. I also want to talk about when you actually plan on drilling it and whether that's changed. So we'll definitely get to those questions here, Stephen. But um, you mentioned important things there. At depth is what you say. Was your DDIP able to look beneath the lithological cover? Because I think that's something you're dealing with.
That's, well, it's looking through the cover rocks. That's why we use geophysics. So most definitely, the style of geophysics that we're using, well, there's two distinct types. One is the IP, which is measuring one set of properties, and the other one is MT, that measures another set of properties. Both of those are deep penetrating techniques. So, reliably with the DDIP, we can model things down to about half a kilometre, with the MT at least a kilometre. So we're seeing very, very deep profiles, but the encouraging thing about the target, the Los Mogotes target that we've just announced, is that it isn't sitting that deep below the surface, some hundreds of meters. So it's quite reachable by drilling, and in a relative sense, a relatively near surface target in that part of the world.
Well, I do also note that in the last one, so the one from yesterday, you talk about the chargeability halo, which again, you say it probably represents a pyrite halo. Is that assumption strictly based on geophysics, or is that where the combination comes in? Like, are you also seeing coarse grain pyrite when you look at the rocks?
Yeah, well, because the surface is oxidized, we're not seeing a lot of preserved sulfide, but we can see what was sulfide. So that pyrite halo at surface correlates to what we would map as the phyllic alteration zone around the porphyry, phyllic transitioning out to propylitic, and it's very, very iron oxide stained. So there's been quite a lot of sulfide in it, but at the moment, currently at the surface, it's oxidized away, and part of that oxidation may be that we're seeing high sulfidation overprint on it as well, so that will have stripped that out. But the iron's there, the phyllic alteration is there, to suggest that this is really quite sulfidic. The important thing for us is what we see is the patterns within the geophysics are matching the geology, and typical pattern that you will see around a porphyry in geophysics is that chargeable halo. In plan view, it can look like a donut, and what it does is that chargeability of pyrite is much more chargeable than, say, chalcopyrite. So what you'll see is where the system is dominated by pyrite, the outer zone, you'll get a very strong chargeable response. It'll still be chargeable in the core, but also what happens is the conductivity of the rock picks up if you're transitioning to a more chalcopyrite dominated assemblage. So again, we can't guarantee that's what's happening until we drill it, but that pattern matches what you would expect to see from a porphyry style system, and certainly that matches what we're seeing, at least at the level we think we're eroded to, from the upper parts of a porphyry system.
It almost sounds to me like you're talking about your favorite child. Is that your favorite target right now? What's your favorite target right now?
It's certainly my favorite target at the moment in our portfolio, and for the reasons that I mentioned right at the beginning, is that it is right on that trend. It's right on that big structural intersection that we see with that big transorigin fault, and we're seeing a nice correlation between, not super high copper numbers at surface, but enough associated with the right other trace elements and the alteration patterns. So it fits what we're looking for, but it's right next door to Filo, and that's got to count for something. So we'll see, and obviously we still have the Meseta target further to the north, and it's at much higher altitude. So we think we're at near, that we're at that epithermal level up on Meseta, and it's right on the property boundary and right on strike for Filo again. So that for me, we've got some, you know, really compelling targets in the property as a whole, but these ones are in the right places with the right signatures, and have scale to them.
What is enough? I mean, you say we see copper grades that are enough, and the concept of enough is something I'm interested by. But let's say you do drill it. I
Yeah.
think last time when we spoke, Alan had joined us and he told me that he expects results Q4 or Q1, Q4 this year, or Q1 next year. And what would the results be? Like your phone rings or you look at your email, you've gotten the results, you open it up, you read it. What are the results that you would want to see from this target in order to be happy with it?
Yeah. Well, hundreds of meters of Filo-like intersection grades, and remembering that, you know, they didn't hit the high grade core till quite late in the exploration there. So I'm not saying we're going to get a giant, you know, Aurora style intersection, but I would be looking for those kind of intersections of the kind of grades that we're seeing next door. So you know, significant copper, gold, and silver grades in that intersection that suggests we have a substantial porphyry system. You know, that's the objective. You know, I can't estimate it. The question of enough is a relative question, and it depends on how you interpret the results and where you think you are within the system. But the alteration signature for us suggests we're not at the epithermal level at the porphyry target, and we're not in the porphyry yet. We're just in between where we get that overlap of the barren outer cap, the litho cap, transitioning into the very outer parts of a porphyry system where you get leakage. And that's all we're seeing is those kind of grades. And remembering, as I said in the email, in the news releases, that we're dealing with oxidized material at surface, so it's secondary copper. So it's been moved around, and, you know, the grades are, you can't tell the original grades from because it's oxidized. But it's there with some moly, it's there with some very nice silver, it's there with a few sniffs of gold, and it has the kind of trace elements that you'd hope to see if you're in one of those outer shells. So some nice bismuth. We're also seeing some antimony and some arsenic, which suggest maybe still remnants of a high sulfidation signature to the thing that you'd see in the upper parts of the system.
And this is the anomaly on the valley floor that we were talking about, right?
That's right, the Los Mogotes target, yes.
What do you think is the source of that anomaly? Because it's on the valley floor, so couldn't it be? Again, I'm just kind of talking out of my back door, you know, supposedly, but could it be remobilized or secondary transport of some sorts that's going to come from above instead of from below?
Always a risk that we've had some you know, what you're talking about, it's called exotic copper transported in, but it doesn't look like that. And the thing that we're seeing with it there is that we have the other elements that make up a signature. When you tend to mobilize copper, you know, exotic copper from elsewhere, it tends not to have all of the other trace elements and the gold and other metals with it. So the fact that they're all there together suggests it's not moving very far if it is. And, you know, what tells us that it's come from there? Well, we've got a stinking big geophysical anomaly sitting right underneath it. So reason to, you know, be hopeful that that's the source of the copper that we're seeing. But the alteration patterns are a little bit like a bullseye. You know, and again, I don't want to drown people here in you know, geological babble here, but we can map changes in the mineral chemistry that are a pseudo map of temperature, and they're kind of like arrows or vectors to where the hotter parts of the alteration system are. And certainly the mica chemistry in the phyllic halo is giving that kind of bullseye pattern. So it's just that coincidence of factors that gives us confidence, but really it's pretty hard to walk away from the magnitude of that geophysical response that's sitting underneath it. If we'd gone across the top of this and not had that geophysical response underneath it, we'd be scratching our heads and going, well, yeah, this is probably not enough for us to go and drill test. But the fact that, and conversely, if we just only had a geophysical target and no alteration or geochemistry at surface, we'd be going maybe, but the fact that they're all there together on top of each other it's like a weights of evidence thing, and it says, it's de-risking that target for us. And that's why we do, these different layers collect these different layers of information. We're trying to get that, multi-layered data set here that allows us to give confidence to go and put that exploration drill hole in. Things have come together there for us very, very nicely and very, very quickly, which is really comforting.
Well, I asked you about grade and maybe a little bit of a size potential or expectation question here. What about depth expectation? Has that changed, or what do you think the distance is? Essentially, what I'm asking here is, what do you think the distance would be between the surface and the top of the supposed potassic core here that you're showing in the DDIP cross section?
Look, all we can do here is use the factual information that we've got. We measured the 3D geophysical properties of the rocks, and it's telling us that the most conductive part of the target, which is, really very, very strong here, it's between 100 and 10 ohm meters is the conductivity anomaly. It suggests there's something very conductive there, and that's sitting within a few hundred meters of the surface. So because you've got topography on it, and because the shape of the roof of this target changes a bit, I have to give a range here, but we're dealing with, we'll be into the target zone within 300 meters and well into it by 400 meters below surface.
That's including the litho cap?
That's correct.
Okay. Yeah. How thick is that on the valley bottom floor?
Well, we're only seeing the remnants of it. And again, people probably don't remember rocks the way I do, and I tend to remember rocks, but some of the photos there in the early press release showed those big ferruginous breccia structures. They're sitting right there on top of this thing, or on the top and the edge of it. So, we're right at that interface here between that litho, the base, the remnants of what we think was a litho cap, and the top of what we think is the phylic shell. So those depths, we're drilling now below surface to target that geophysical response, and we'll have a clearer picture on that once the 3D model comes back. So, we've announced one line. There are actually 4 lines there that total nearly 11 kilometers, but in between those lines, we've then taken multiple readings in a 3D vector IPMT array that will fill in the points in between the lines. And the outer edge of the survey, of course, we've designed it to marry in with the work that we've done in Argentina last year. So all of that will be modeled together, the 2023 survey with the 2025 survey, to give us a 3D picture of what's going on. And, we will see, attractive targets in some of the other lines. We designed this to go across the top of Meseta, and those lines were designed to test for another type of response, which is, a high sulfidation epithermal system. It's the gold and silver plus or minus copper in those systems is associated with a lot of silica. So because silica is not conductive, it's very resistive, we would anticipate seeing, if our thinking on what's going on in the set is right, we'll anticipate seeing a big resistive response underneath that plateau, and that'll hopefully marry up with all the surface signs again that we have there. And one of the lines has gone partially across the top of that new target that we've called Cuenca. And again, we hope to see a response there that'll give us a reason to do further work. And that's, a brand new target, reconnaissance samples. But again, that signature, it's a gold, silver signature, a little bit of copper, a little bit of base metals, but a lot of antimony, which tells us that we're still very high in the system. So both Cuenca and Meseta sit topographically much higher above the valley floor, hundreds of meters above where we think this porphyry-like target has now been identified in the valley floor. So they may be pieces of a large related porphyry epithermal system. We will just have to see what the geophysics tells us, and of course what happens when we try to drill test these things.
That's Meseta right behind you on the picture, right?
No, that's actually Nueva Colorida.
Oh, okay. But essentially they sit on the top of the mountain, as far as I understand it.
Which one are we asking about now?
Meseta.
Or Meseta sits right at the same level as the Filo del Sol plateau.
Yep.
You know how Filo has that big flat-lying blanket and then the pipe-like body, that's Aurora. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're sitting right on the extension of that advanced argillic plateau that hosts the blanket-like part of Filo extends into our property. We've demonstrably shown that with our work now. So they're higher up, and then the Los Mogotes porphyry target sits several hundred meters below that in the valley floor, which is the relationship you would expect.
How hard would it be to get a drill down there on the valley floor? Is it easier to get a drill there than it is on Meseta, or how would that work?
Yeah, so look, we're investigating how to do that now. There is a road that comes up through the valley that already exists. It doesn't go right to the drill site, but it goes within a couple of kilometres of it. So that access route is a potential way for us forward. But I've also mentioned previously that where Mogotes is quite advanced in putting into place the bilateral accord between Chile and Argentina that would allow us to access it from the Argentine side as well once that's in place. Mm-hmm. So there is an option to access it from the roads that we've built in the area you can see behind me here, and just come across the border and drill it from the Chilean side, Argentine side as well. So we'll just work through that over the coming months as we work through, the permitting process and everything to drill test.
I'll be back to Meseta here in a second. What we're talking about, because I want to talk about those massive silica clasts in the breccias that you've mentioned in one of those news releases. But
yes,
I want to talk about the most recent NR, I think it was, that we talk about the geophysics, but how do your geophysics work with your geochem here is essentially what I want to talk about, something that you just touched upon a couple of minutes ago. But I mean, do your copper anomalies coincide more closely with the resistivity or the chargeability, or is it the alteration boundaries? What are they related to? How do they fit in the whole thesis, if that makes sense?
So if you imagine that the chargeability halo is like a donut, mm-hmm. and the conductivity target sits in the middle of that. Yeah. So we've got a hole in the donut is where the conductive feature of the geophysical anomaly is. Yeah. So there's the hole. Here's the geochemistry right over the top of the donut hole. Mm-hmm. So it's a very strong correlation spatially of not only just the geochem, but also the alteration patterns, and then the geophysical anomaly sitting straight underneath it.
Right. On the topic of geochem, how are the moly and copper ratios there? But also, how are they across the package? How do they vary? I mean, on the valley bottom floor versus Meseta?
Well, if you mean across the project, mm-hmm. quite a lot. And what we see is that targets like Colorida, the ones in the back here, and Frontera, are really copper-moly porphyries. They don't have a lot of gold with them. They're copper and molybdenum. But what we're seeing in porphyries as we get onto what we think is the direct strike extension is that we're seeing much more copper, silver, gold like Filo. So again, that's an encouraging sign. And this is now we're talking about the Los Mogotes target in the valley floor. When we're up in things like Meseta, we're right up at that epithermal level. It's clearly had really strong advanced argillic alteration, and that kind of alteration is caused by very acid hydrothermal fluids. So what that tends to do is strip all of the copper out. It's like a dump leach operation where you dump leaching copper. The hydrothermal fluids will take all of the copper out and just strip it out. But it will leave the traces of gold and traces of moly behind. And if it's doing its job where there's a later stage hydrothermal event that's bringing in the ore grade material, you'll see also lots of epithermal pathfinders high in the system. And that's what we're seeing mostly at Meseta, is lots of antimony and lots of arsenic, and they're the high-level pathfinder elements that we would expect to see there. But encouragingly, we're still seeing quite reasonable gold and silver levels in the Meseta area as well. And so I think, perhaps if you recall the news release, the one prior to this one, I separated the geochemical signature in Meseta into two areas. On the western side, we're seeing a lot of high-level pathfinder elements, and we're seeing some gold up to 300 ppb in the rock chips, which doesn't sound like much, but again, geology and exploration is contextual, and in that context, that's quite significant. But we're seeing it with tens to hundreds of ppm of antimony and elevated arsenic and some tellurium, the kind of high-level epithermal pathfinders that you want to see. On the eastern side of Meseta, where we're seeing the clasts are porphyry dominated, or it's porphyry clasts in the mix of the breccias. We're seeing a lot more gold and a lot more silver. There we're seeing up to 1.5 grams of gold in the breccias and up to 18 grams of silver in the breccias. So there's something different going on there. I speculated that it's because we're seeing those porphyry clasts, that there's a porphyry source at depth somewhere there that may be contributing that metal. But certainly both of those targets are looking attractive. What we're waiting for is the geophysical lines that we put across that plateau, because what we want to see is that sitting under the plateau, there's a big, very resistive body that hopefully is carrot-shaped and has a root to it. And that would be our target in that high sulfidation setting.
Well, and now we can go back, I suppose, to those massive silica clasts at Meseta in the breccias, which are interesting as well. Where do you think they come from? Hydrothermal, tectonic, collapse related? What is it?
No, look, the clasts are definitely being hydrothermally transported. As in this is a hydrothermal breccia. In fact, parts of it may be originally a phreatomagmatic breccia. There are some preserved textures that suggest that might be the case. And what does that mean is that there was a hot intrusive source at depth that was driving it, if that's true. But what we're seeing mostly in the Meseta West area is that the clasts are pieces of vuggy silica, right? And that's what you want to see in a epithermal system. That that vuggy silica is it's like a residual sponge that is just waiting to be filled with metals and hydrothermal fluids once it's been leached out like that. There, the clasts are all buggy silica and silicified clasts, but they are transported, probably vertically some distance. But on the eastern side, that's where we see all of the porphyry style clasts that we've seen. So there's a real distinction in the source of those clasts. They've come from something else that is evidenced in the pieces that it has porphyry veining in it, and it has relic porphyritic textures. It's still very leached and very, very, stripped out by those fluids. But there is, a different source for those clasts, and they do look like they've come from a porphyry at depth. We can't tell where that is necessarily. That's what the geophysics will help us with, or how deep that is. Again, hopefully the geophysics would give us a lead there, and we cannot tell the grade of it because those fluids have stripped any copper out that may have been in it. But it's very encouraging to have those clasts there, and to have that elevated gold and silver, and in fact very strong antimony and very strong moly in that part of the breccia system.
Well, you also talk about, and I was pulling up your news release here to look at it, but you also talk about lead and zinc values in the epithermal trace element suite here in one of those news releases, which I suppose would be maybe related to it, but you say that it may represent geochemical leakage. Why do you believe this might be the case? Why is it geochemical leakage instead of it being a distal halo or something like that?
Well, effectively, that's what you with leakage. You're saying that it's a halo from something that's concealed at depth.
Okay. And
that's why we're saying, look, the grades that we're seeing at surface here, they're not, ore grade like numbers yet over ore grade widths. We're dealing with, indications of the right kind of metals, and we need to drill into something at depth in all of these prospects to get those, ore grade style numbers over the big widths we've talked about before we can, start to talk about anything, like a discovery. So, the big diesel powered lie detector has got to do its testing. Yeah.
Has your exploration target size changed? Like, do you now believe it could be bigger or larger based on the additional data that you now have?
I think what we can say is that we had some significant targets before this that had, large footprints, and we have talked about that are of the, footprint scale that you would hope to see for a porphyry scale system. So these targets at this stage, I can't quantify the size of them because I'm dealing with, one line in the geophysics survey. Hopefully the subsequent lines will give us more lines, and those vector points around it will give us more of a feeling for the footprint. But what I've said is within the one line that we have where it's traversed the target, at that threshold cutoff that we've used of about 100 ohm meters within the conductive donut hole, it's up to 800 meters wide. That's a nice size footprint. Okay. For a porphyry style target. But remember, we're dealing with geophysics here, so it's not a direct quantifiable measure of what may or may not be at depth, but it's an encouraging indication.
We haven't talked too much. I know you touched upon it, but we haven't talked too much about Cuenca or Cuenca. I don't even know how to pronounce it. But what are you seeing there? What's the summary?
Yeah, so brand new prospect that was sort of picked up by our reconnaissance team. So really early stage, but we're seeing, not clear outcrop to give a good feeling for true widths here, but there's structural zones there, many of them, some of them, in excess of 0.5 kilometre. We can trace them with the geochemistry, long, maybe 1 metre or 2 wide, and they're sheeted veinlets within those zones, and then there are cross-cutting structures, and they're developed over a 3, 4, 500 meter area where we can see them just sticking through the scree cover. So, the style of veining is something that's transitional, somewhere between an epithermal and porphyry. It's a granular silica. Some suggestion that we might be getting occasional porphyry-like veins in it, but not really clear yet. But the geochemistry is really good and strong. We're seeing, nice gold responses, nice silver responses, and very, very strong antimony and arsenic signatures again. So at least at that level, it's an epithermal-like signature. What it transitions to at depth, we'll have to do some more work to see. But the alteration signature there is again very epithermal. It's alunite, it's dickite, it's kaolinite. It's the kind of things that you would see at an epithermal level, and epithermal advanced argillic signature. So it's high, and it's nice and easily to access it. So we'll be able to advance it fairly quickly. We're going to have at least one of the geophysics lines will go across the top of it to give us some indication of whether there's something at depth underneath it.
What do you think the domino structure control here is then at, you're going to have to pronounce it for me.
At Cuenca?
Cuenca or Cuenca? I don't even know why it's not Cuenca, but yeah.
Cuenca, yeah.
Cuenca.
Well, okay. Language, what an interesting thing, almost as diverse as geology. So the dominant trend there is the elongate direction of it follows that big trans-origin structure that's called the Macho Muerto. Okay, and so the dominant trend lies along that, but we're also seeing northeast trending cross structures that are also have sheeted veins, gold and silver geochemistry in them. So it's that sort of intersection pattern that we're seeing, but it's very strongly lying along that Macho Muerto fault zone.
And I suppose the question here specifically for Mogotes is, does Filo's stuff continue on to your package? I think that's kind of the larger question here for the investment thesis. How do these targets compare to Filo del Sol, as well as in size, but also in grade and thickness of the cover and everything else? How do they feel like, I guess?
Well, Meseta, the alteration and the style of setting that we're seeing there, we could translate next door, and it fits very much into it. It's very much an extension of what you see at surface there. The grades, there's not a lot published on the surface rock chip geochemistry above the Filo zone for me to really compare it, so I probably shouldn't. The geochemistry, we've talked about this quite a lot, is that because we're dealing with overprinting hydrothermal systems, we get a lot of the geochemistry, particularly the copper, gets moved around and dispersed. And depending on where you are in the alteration system, sometimes the places that are the most prospective to drill are the ones where there's no significant metal at surface at all, because you're in that steam heated zone. We think, at least at Meseta, all of the steam heated zone is gone, which is a good thing because it's terrible stuff to drill through. But it's, for us, it feels very similar to what's very literally just across the property boundary. The copper numbers that we're seeing at Los Mogotes, again, I'm sure there are places where you can go to surface at Filo and get much higher grades, and there are places where you can go at surface in Filo and get much lower grades. So we're not seeing, as I said, we are interpreting what we're seeing as some leakage. It's not, large areas of, high-grade copper at surface. The grades have to improve as we drill deeper into the geophysics target, or it's not a deposit, right? Yeah.
Do you think there's magnetic continuity between Filo's last drill hole, I believe was hole 116, and Los Mogotes?
Magnetic continuity. Well, haven't really seen any detail magnetics over that hole 116, which I think we're talking about, yeah. But the styles of alteration certainly continue into our property that you see there at surface. What the Filo's announcement that defined announced that drill hole, which was 610 meters from near surface of significant gold and copper mineralization, is that while it sits within that overall north-south oriented Filo zone, the detail structure is a northwest oriented structure. And if you look at the grade distribution, you can see that hole and a series of other holes line up within the resource of higher grade, and it's following a splay that's parallel to the Macho Muerto fault zone.
And then it's, again, as you said, the truth machine, the diesel powered truth machine that is going to answer how much resemblance there really is. And again, thinking about when does that happen? You see, you're fast tracking these targets as much as possible here in the news release. What does that mean specifically? When do you think you're going to drill them?
Well, there's two moderating factors that we have to really work through. One is obviously we're heading into Southern Hemisphere winter now, so the season will be, if it's a big snowfall season, it'll be later in spring. If it's a low snowfall season, then we might get in a bit earlier, but we kind of anticipate late October. We can physically be in there to be prepping to drill. But obviously there's permitting processes and everything to work through as well, and we're doing what we can to accelerate that as well.
What are the specific next steps then, in terms of, again, you mentioning permitting, but you're waiting on some other results as we mentioned earlier?
Let's get the data. Yeah. Geophysics, the geophysics lines are coming in. The infill geochemistry is coming in. We'll also get some more alteration data from those samples with the TerraSpec units. So we'll get a full picture of what's happening. We'll get the 3D geophysics. We'll follow in from behind the line data. That'll help us target the drill holes. And from that, we can plan, the potential road access and the potential locations of the drill pads that we'd use to test it. So it's a fair bit of work to do, over the coming months to be ready, but we've certainly done it before, and we think we can be ready, all things falling in place here to be drilling it. The one factor here that's a bit hard for us to predict is the bilateral accord, which would allow us to access from both sides of the border. But again, we've been working on that for quite some time now, and we think we're making good progress. That has to be ratified, by the governments on both sides of the border. But we already have one side signed up, and the other one's working through the process. So hopefully that'll be in place soon as well.
Why keep marketing in the process of coming up with the drill targets? That's a question that I had written down on here. I suppose it's more of a question for Alan, for your CEO here. But how do you feel about this as a geologist? I see these advertisements, these Mogotes advertisements across the internet and whatnot. I see you doing a lot of interviews. There's a lot of Alan's at a conference right now, and so on and so forth. How do you, as a geologist, feel about marketing before drilling, essentially?
I think it's critical. I mean, our shareholders have invested dollars, into this company, and they need to be informed how we've deployed that capital, and the kind of results that we're seeing to make informed investment decisions. So I'm a storyteller. I love telling stories by nature, but I think it's absolutely critical that we keep people informed so that they first of all know that we're deploying their capital sensibly, and secondly to make a decision whether we're adding value with what we're doing. So I think this is the point where a lot of our data is starting to flow in from a very big field season where we've been working very hard in Argentina and on the Chilean side, and we want to get that news out so that people can see what we have, and hopefully in that process they'll make a decision to buy or hold shares, and maybe potentially some new investors will see what we're doing and go, well, that's pretty sexy looking stuff, and I'll put my money there instead of next door with somebody else.
I don't want to keep you up all night, Stephen. I know it's kind of getting late for you there. I ask you this, and I'll keep asking you this every time you come on, but what keeps you up at night? Has anything changed? What do you think is the biggest risk for Mogotes now that you've seen the additional data?
What's keeping me up at night at the moment, Antonio, is waiting for those results to come in and see what's on the next line. It's like Christmas, right? What's the present that the next line will deliver to us? So at the moment, it's really about anticipation and a bit of excitement, because we've turned up some pretty good looking targets here very, very quickly, and still a lot of information to flow in on them. And but the desire to see those results is certainly gets me up early every morning just checking what's coming overnight. Okay.
Well, it seems like, or it sounds like, we're going to be talking a couple of more times throughout the summer, so there'll be opportunities to catch up. Just before I let you go, what am I forgetting to ask you? Anything else that you came here hoping to talk about that I failed to bring up?
Well, just that perhaps we've very much, as soon as we secured the option agreement on the Chilean ground, we've focused a lot of energy in Chile. But don't forget, there's still a lot of news flow and information flow to come from Argentina as well. And we were working both sides of the border through the latter parts of the season there. So lots of news on both sides of the border to come through here on the targets we've been working up.
And that's been Stephen Nano, technical advisor to Mogotes. Stephen, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks again, man. Really appreciate your time.
And as always, thanks to everyone for watching Resource Talks. I have a couple of more things to say, though. The fact that this company was interviewed here today does not mean that they're necessarily a good or a bad company. I'm not here to endorse nor attack anyone. I am simply here to ask some questions. If you find that I have failed in asking a question that you would have liked to hear an answer to, which will happen as I'm not an experienced interviewer, please let me know, and I will try to correct that mistake in a future interview. As mentioned at the beginning, please understand that mineral exploration and development is an extremely risky business. Losing money is the norm and should be the expectation. This is a very complex sector, and the performance of individual companies typically depends on many different moving particles, including company-specific factors like geology, financing ability, and many others, really, as well as particles that are outside of the company's control, like geopolitics, macroeconomics, commodity prices, and many more, most of which are nearly impossible to fully understand. Moreover, these companies that typically get interviewed on Resource Talks are in the pre-revenue stage, which means they rely on the public markets for the financing of their operations, which could result in shareholder dilution. Furthermore, as a general rule of thumb, you'll be better off understanding that all company communications online, albeit this interview or their website and their presentation and their social media accounts, or even the social media accounts which you thought were your friends and then told you about a stock, everything really that these companies do is intended as marketing. And although I do not make buy or sell recommendations because there is a clear conflict of interest given the nature of my business, many out there do. And you should be aware of that inherent bias, and you should be careful out there. That bias is not always going to be clearly disclosed with everyone out there. So it is safer for you anytime you're watching any type of company-specific content to approach it with a dose of skepticism and assume that the party telling you about it is biased in at least some shape or form, because there will always be a bias. Again, albeit clear or not. So always ask yourself what the incentive of your counterparty is and never rely on them regardless of their incentives, but instead double check if what they're saying is true, again, by using setterplus.ca. The fact that I have no idea what I'm doing should already be clear to you at this point. I am not saying this to make jokes or laugh with myself. I just simply do not have a long enough track record of consistent investment profits. So I should, under no circumstances, be considered an authority on anything. Again, although this may sound amusing to you, believe me, it is not amusing and it is not intended as a joke. I'm simply pointing out a fact and warning you not to rely on anything I do or say. Unfortunately, at least to my understanding, nobody out there has any special abilities. The CEOs do not possess any superior knowledge, and they cannot know about what will go up, what will go down, or what will go in circles. Some people even believe that to be rule number one on Wall Street. Nobody really knows. None of us know whether any of the company's activities will result in a success, again, given that we're talking about high-risk activities where most of the times it ends in failure. Also, unfortunately, try as I may, I won't always catch all red flags or all challenges with the companies. So even if I did ask a few tough questions in here, don't rely on this being all of the tough questions. Again, these are complicated startups with many moving parts, and I am conflicted given the nature of this business. Therefore, I cannot guarantee the quality of anything presented in this video, and you cannot hold me responsible for any losses or damages stemming from the way you decide to use this interview. Viewers, listeners, and readers acknowledge and agree that the information presented herein did not constitute a solicitation or an offer to buy or sell any security or investment or to participate in any trading strategy. Resource Talks and all parties involved in the management of the business strictly disclaim any and all liability for losses and or damages, whether direct, indirect, special, or consequential, or other consequences, however so caused, arising out of any use or reproduction of the content published by Resource Talks or any decision made or action taken in reliance upon it. By consuming this content, all consumers vow to release Resource Talks and all parties involved in the management of the business from all claims, proceedings, or consequences. This is all to say, I know it's a lot of lawyer talk, but this is all to say that you shouldn't blindly trust me or anybody on the internet, and you should do your own research. Once again, social media is meant for entertainment. It is setterplus.ca where you do your research. That's where you'll find the company's official filings, and I encourage you to read and analyze the Management Information Circular, the financial statements, the Management Discussion and Analysis, and whenever available, the NI 43-101 technical documents. If you don't understand everything in those documents, the chances of you losing money are even higher than they normally are in this space. And as mentioned earlier, the chances of even the best analysts in this sector losing money are extremely high, since this is venture capital and it is not for everybody. I'll leave you with one of Charlie Munger's quotes, which I wish I had listened to more often earlier on, which says, quote, "If you don't understand it, don't do it."